Legally to say, but I think the governor has said that they want to seek the death penalty, which is very real in Utah, and they still have the firing squad in Utah.
September 12th, 2025, Utah Valley University. The clock reads 7:45 p.m. Mountain Time when the unthinkable happened. Charlie Kirk, founder of Turning Point USA, a relentless defender of conservative values, was midway through a fiery speech when the crack of gunfire ripped through the auditorium. Students dove to the ground. Security scrambled, and within seconds, America's conservative movement lost one of its loudest voices. Kirk was assassinated in front of a stunned crowd, his words about faith, family, and freedom silenced in an instant. Investigators now say the shooter was just 22 years old, Tyler James Robinson, a local with a twisted agenda and a personal vendetta against everything Kirk stood for. The attack wasn't random. Police recovered shell casings at the scene, etched with chilling words, "Hey, fascist, catch." It was hate carved into metal, deliberate, cold, and meant to send a message. By the next morning, grief gave way to outrage. Americans wanted answers, and they wanted them fast. How did a young man from a Republican family end up pulling the trigger on one of the GOP's fiercest fighters? That's where the story begins to spiral. By dawn on September 13th, the suspect's name was out, Tyler James Robinson. Authorities confirmed he didn't run, didn't try to vanish into the night. Instead, it was his own family that turned him in. His parents walked him into custody, telling police they could no longer shield him after learning the truth. Imagine the weight of that, handing over your son knowing he had just assassinated Charlie Kirk, a man millions saw as the torchbearer of conservative youth. Robinson's background made the case even more shocking. He grew up in a Republican household. His father had voted for Trump twice. His mother volunteered at church fundraisers. Yet, according to the FBI, Robinson had been quietly slipping into a world of resentment and radicalization. He fixated on Kirk, blaming him for everything wrong in America. And inside his small apartment, investigators found evidence of that obsession. Notebooks filled with rants, online posts dripping with hostility, and disturbing sketches that lined up with the attack. But Robinson wasn't living alone. He shared that apartment with a transgender partner, now cooperating with the FBI, offering insights into how his anger boiled over. For investigators, that detail cracked open a bigger question. What outside forces pushed this young man over the edge? And where those forces came from may stun even seasoned watchers of America's political battles. The FBI wasted no time digging into Robinson's connections, and what they uncovered painted a picture of a young man consumed by anger and shaped by outside voices. Though he had deep Republican roots, he wasn't attending conservative rallies or church events anymore. Instead, agents traced his activity to a cluster of fringe online groups, many laced with leftist rhetoric, where Charlie Kirk was a constant punching bag. Investigators are now looking hard at whether those influences, blogs, chat rooms, and radical activist circles, helped drive Robinson from conservative upbringing to cold-blooded assassin. Meanwhile, Kirk's death sent shockwaves through the movement he built. Turning Point USA declared a week of mourning, calling him a patriot silenced by hate. Fox News went wall-to-wall with tributes from Laura Ingraham to Sean Hannity, all hammering home the same point. This wasn't just a crime against a man, but an assault on the very values of free speech and conservative courage. Breitbart described it as political violence in its rawest form. And while Robinson sat isolated in a Utah jail, refusing to cooperate with authorities, the outcry for justice grew louder. The question wasn't whether he would be punished, it was how severe that punishment should be. And the next voice to weigh in was the loudest in American politics. On September 14th, Donald Trump himself called into Fox News, his voice steady but burning with anger. He didn't dance around the issue. He demanded the death penalty for Tyler James Robinson. Not someday, not after years of appeals, but swiftly, unmistakably, and by the harshest method available, the firing squad. This was an attack on America, on faith, on freedom, Trump said, insisting the punishment had to match the crime. Conservative media lit up instantly. Newsmax ran the headline, "Trump Death Penalty for Kirk Killer." The Daily Wire echoed the urgency, saying anything less would be a disgrace to the country Charlie Kirk loved. And this wasn't just Trump's call. Utah Governor Spencer Cox came out strong, vowing to pursue the death penalty under state law. He reminded the press that Utah is one of the few states that still allows firing squad as a legal execution method, adding a chilling layer to the debate. For conservatives across the nation, the message was clear. The system must not buckle. The punishment must fit the atrocity. Yet behind the scenes, prosecutors were still weighing formal charges, with federal officials circling the case like hawks. And what they might add to the table could push this trial into unprecedented territory. By September 15th, prosecutors in Utah were already drafting state-level murder charges, but whispers from Washington hinted this case was bigger than a state courtroom. Federal investigators saw the etchings on those bullet casings, the online rants dripping with political venom, and they began eyeing possible terrorism-related charges. If federal prosecutors step in, Robinson wouldn't just be facing a murder trial. He could be branded a domestic terrorist with penalties far beyond Utah's statutes. Meanwhile, Robinson sat in near total isolation at the county jail. No TV, no books, no visitors besides his attorney. Guards reported he barely spoke, eating only enough to survive. He refused to answer investigators' questions, his silence forcing the FBI to rely heavily on digital footprints and testimony from his transgender partner. And that partner, now cooperating fully, confirmed what many suspected. Robinson had spiraled after consuming wave after wave of anti-Kirk content online, where leftist influencers painted Kirk as the enemy of progress. The picture growing clearer wasn't just about one man's crime. It was about an ideological battle bleeding into violence. And with formal charges expected by the end of the week, the next step would determine whether America sees this as a straightforward killing or a political assassination demanding the harshest reckoning. September 16th arrived with tension thick in the air. Across conservative America, the mood had shifted from grief to determination. At vigils, young Turning Point USA members held up Kirk's books and waved flags, chanting not just his name, but his mission. Breitbart reported that in state after state, Republican leaders were rallying around the idea that this was more than a crime. It was a political hit job designed to intimidate the right. Inside Utah's State House, lawmakers began openly discussing legislation to fast-track death penalty cases tied to political violence. Newsmax described it as a line in the sand moment. And while liberals warned against what they called vengeance politics, conservative outlets framed it differently: accountability. If America couldn't protect one of its most outspoken patriots, what message would that send to anyone who dared to speak boldly? Even more chilling, FBI officials admitted they were still probing whether Robinson acted alone or if networks of influence played a role. That single question, was this just a lone wolf or part of something larger, kept fueling speculation, and it left Americans bracing for what might come out once formal charges landed in court. By late afternoon, prosecutors signaled they were nearly ready. Multiple counts of first-degree murder, aggravated assault, and weapons violations were on the table. But the real spotlight was on one line of debate. Would they include a terrorism enhancement? Conservative commentators hammered that point, arguing that if a conservative leader was assassinated with bullets etched in hate, then failing to call it terrorism would be political cowardice. The Daily Wire flatly declared, if this isn't terrorism, then the word has no meaning. Meanwhile, family and allies of Charlie Kirk were making their own voices heard. His widow, Erica, appeared on Fox News with tears in her eyes, saying, "Charlie died standing up for what he believed, and America cannot let his killer get away with anything less than the maximum penalty." Her words ignited a fire among supporters nationwide. At the same time, Robinson's defense attorney quietly filed motions to delay, citing his client's mental health. But conservatives saw that as a stall tactic, a way to muddy the waters and soften the punishment. Tension was building, the stakes growing, and it all pointed to one looming moment: how this nation would answer the question of justice. Now the stage is set. Formal charges are expected within days, and the nation waits to see if prosecutors will follow Trump's thunderous call for the death penalty, or if the federal government will push this case into a terrorism trial with no room for leniency. Utah's firing squad option hangs over the headlines like a dark cloud, a reminder of just how severe the punishment could be. Conservatives say anything less than execution would cheapen Charlie Kirk's sacrifice. They point out how he spent his final moments doing what he always did, challenging the culture, empowering students, and defending America's founding ideals. His death, they argue, cannot be another headline buried under excuses or politics. Robinson remains silent in his cell, but his crime already speaks volumes. From Fox News to Newsmax, the chorus is clear. This is not just about one man's death, but about the right of conservatives to speak freely without fear of violence. And as the trial of Tyler James Robinson looms, the only certainty is that America will be forced to decide, justice by the book or justice that sends a message.